Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to the top 10 scariest last words from prison inmates. Now, this is going to be an interesting one because anything related to prison, serving time, things like that, death row, I find quite fascinating, almost in like just a curiosity way, slightly morbid, but I like, what kind of life did these guys live in, behind bars, they're confined to these cells, these buildings for years on end. Like, how does that change their mentality? So I'm eager to hear what people have to say, when their time is up, when they're about to be executed. Like, do they feel remorse? Do they have anything pleasant to say? So yeah, this is going to be a really, really interesting one to watch. So let's do it.
A convicted felon is executed by lethal injection or in the electric chair, it is usually customary for the criminal to have one last opportunity to address the public with their final last words. Sometimes inmates take this opportunity to make peace with their actions, while others say a chilling statement that is aimed to shock or upset people. There have been a ton of chilling last words from inmates right before they take their last breaths. So you know what, let's take a look at this. This is the top 10 scary last words from prison inmates. Starting things off, number 10, we have Robert Alton Harris. He said, "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper." He was arrested on July 5th of 1978 when him and his brother hijacked a car with two teenage boys in it. They ordered them to drive to a remote location where the brothers brutally murdered them, and then they used the vehicle as a getaway car when they robbed a San Diego bank. Robert Harris was arrested just 1 hour after the robbery, and he was charged with murder and auto theft, kidnapping, burglary, and bank robbery. One of the arresting officers was the father of one of the murdered boys.
Oh no.
But he didn't realize that the victim was his son until later.
God.
He wasn't even able to recognize his son's face. That's how violent the murder was. Robert Harris was sentenced to death in 1979. After many appeals, he was finally executed in San Quentin's gas chamber on April 21st of 1992. Moving up this list with George Engel in at number 9. He was an anarchist who didn't like to follow any sort of rules or regulations. He was involved with a lot of activism and protest in the Chicago area. A protest bombing took place in Haymarket Square in Chicago that resulted in the death of 7 police officers, 4 civilians, and a lot of other people who were seriously injured. George Engel was actually at home playing cards while this riot broke out, and he was arrested the next day and charged with conspiracy in the bombings. He was convicted and sentenced to hanging, but before he took his last breath, he said, "Hurrah for anarchy, this is the happiest moment of my life." Roger Keith Coleman makes his last
Really? That's the happiest moment? Are you sure?
statement in at number 8. His case gained nationwide attention and major controversy because he maintained his innocence the whole time during his conviction and even right before he was executed. During his final last words, he said, "An innocent man is going to be murdered tonight. When my innocence is proven, I hope Americans will realize the injustice of the death penalty as all other civilized countries have." He was convicted in Virginia for assaulting and murdering his sister-in-law on the day that he has been laid off from work. After his death, the DNA evidence was reanalyzed, and in January 2006, the governor announced that the testing of the DNA evidence has conclusively proven that he was guilty of the crime. Okay, that's great and all.
Okay, so he was actually guilty. I was expecting him to say he was innocent. That would have been so bad.
But why don't you think you should have done 1,000 tests on the DNA before you executed him? It makes no sense. What if the DNA evidence proved that he wasn't guilty? What would the press conference look like then? Oops, we made a massive mistake and killed an innocent man. My bad. And now at number 7, we have Timothy McVeigh. He infamously said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." If you guys remember, he was the one behind the Oklahoma City bombing, which killed 168 people and injured over 680 others. This bombing is actually the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the United States. His execution date was set for June 11, 2001, and he made a request to have it publicly televised, but this motion was denied. He invited a composer to perform classical music on the night of his execution, and he requested to have a Catholic chaplain. He also requested requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream as his last meal. He was executed by lethal injection, and his wait to be executed was way shorter than most inmates waiting on death row. He only spent about 4 years on death row, while most inmates spend an average of 15 years.
15 years? Is that all the appeals and things like that? That's a long time. You know, I guess, yeah, you're going to fight it with all you've got, right? You're going to throw everything you can at it.
The infamous Jeffrey Dahmer is next up at number 6. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms for murdering 17 men and boys in the Milwaukee area, and this is between 1978 and 1991. He was also heavily into necrophilia, and he kept his victims' body parts in the freezer so that he can just eat them later. The interesting part of this story is that Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't given the death penalty. His inmate actually beat him to death because he said that Jeffrey Dahmer was a sick and creepy man. And yeah, he was. He used to make this person food look like human body parts, and he would cover them in ketchup to resemble blood. So
my God, you sicko.
So according to Jeffrey Dahmer's murderer, his last words were, "I don't care if I live or die, go ahead and kill me." And now at number 5 we have Tom Blackjack Ketchum. He was an outlawed cowboy who murdered someone in 1895. After that, his gang fled to New Mexico, where they committed more robberies before he was captured during an unsuccessful attempt to rob a train. He was quickly arrested, put on trial, found guilty, and sentenced to death by hanging. When his execution date arrived, it was the biggest public display in the area because he was the first person to be hanged for a train robbery in New Mexico. However, things didn't go as smoothly as they hoped. Before he was hanged, he said this: "I'll be in hell before you start breakfast, boys, let her rip." And right after that, he said the rope completely decapitated him, and it is said that his headless body landed on its feet and stayed standing upright for quite some time.
No way. No way. What?
John Wayne Gacy had 3 famous last words, and this comes into number 4. He kept it short and sweet when he said, "Kiss my ass." I don't know about you guys, but I think I would have, a lot more to say for my final words than "kiss my ass." But then again, he was a textbook serial killer who didn't really have any emotions. He was known as the Killer Clown because he used to dress up as Pogo the Clown and perform at many charitable events and birthday parties. He took the lives of at least 33 young boys in Illinois, and he would bury their bodies underneath his home.
This guy must be the inspiration behind Pennywise, because he's literally, well, there's a lot of similarities there, aren't there? Evil.
So when he was convicted of sexual assault in 1968, the police were able to find all of the dead bodies that he tried to cover up. Despite a bunch of corpses being found underneath his own home, he maintained his innocence. But he was found guilty in 1980 because there was just so much compelling evidence against him. He was given multiple death penalties and life sentences, and finally, after being on death row for 14 years, he was executed by lethal injection. Aileen Wuornos is up next at number 3. Aileen had a terrible childhood that was full of abuse and abandonment, so it's almost no surprise that she went on a killing rampage that would define her as America's most infamous female serial killer. She worked as a prostitute, and she killed 7 men that picked her up along the highway. Aileen said that all of her murderers were out of self-defense, but she was also convicted and sentenced to death for 6 of the murders. She was executed by—
Damn, look at that face. Look at that. If looks could kill.
lethal injection on October 9, 2002. But before she died, she said this: "I just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June the 6th. Like the movie, a big mothership of all, I'll be back." I don't even know what this even means, but I am pretty scared. And June 6th. What happens on June 6th? Carl Panzram's last words makes it onto this list at number 2. You probably don't recognize his name, but he is actually known as one of the most sadistic American serial killers of all time. He had more than a dozen aliases, and no one knew anything about what he has done for years until he was captured in November 1928.
I wonder what makes somebody, capable of doing this, capable of killing people. It's got to be something in the brain that just switches off, like, Because you know by doing that, you've done something you can never, ever take back. Like, it's going to affect your life massively. Like, it's just crazy to think about.
Before his death, he confessed to killing 21 people and sexually harming all 1,000 males. Is this real life right now? And right before he was hanged, he said, "In my lifetime, I have murdered 21 human beings. I have committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings." That is just sickening, and for all those reasons, I'm not the least bit sorry for this guy. The Vampire of Dusseldorf falls onto our list at number 1. He is known as a vampire because he would occasionally attempt to drink the blood from his victims' wounds while they were still alive. But eventually he was arrested and sentenced to death by beheading because he committed a series of murders and sexual assaults. He even admitted to killing a 9-year-old girl. It is confirmed that he murdered at least 9 people, but the police suspected that he brutally murdered a lot more people. So one evening before his death, he ordered a Wiener Schnitzel, a bottle of white wine, and fried potatoes, and the next morning he was taken to the guillotine to have his head chopped off. But before he left this world, he made one last scary statement.
Was that actually his head? Is that actually his head?
That probably haunted the people that were at his execution. He said, "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my head? That would be a pleasure to end all pleasures." I mean, yeah, after hearing that, I'm definitely gonna have nightmares, and if that wasn't enough, his mummified head is on display right now in a Wisconsin museum after doctors tried to cut it open to find reasons behind his evil. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Well, there you guys have it. Thank you guys so much for watching.
Super disturbing, man. Like, as I mentioned in the video, I just wonder what makes people snap and decide to take people's lives. You know, it's just something that no sane person, I don't think, would really consider. Like, because you know what it means. You know, like, life, you know, I'm almost lost for words. Like, hearing some of the stuff that was said, like the last guy asking if he got to hear himself, hear the blood leaving his head. Super creepy stuff, but kind of fascinating, I can't lie. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.